My beloved child. Stop scrolling for a moment. There is a reason your eyes landed here at this exact time. You were not searching for this message, yet somehow this message found you. Something has been moving beneath the surface of your life. Something unseen. Something connected to a person whose heart has been silently reaching toward you even while distance, confusion, and unanswered questions stood between you. I know the questions you carry. I know the nights when you stared into the darkness wondering why certain connections feel impossible to forget. I know the moments when a name entered your mind without warning. I know the strange pull that returns again and again, even when logic tells you to move on. Listen carefully now. What I am about to reveal is not meant to fill your heart with fear. It is meant to prepare your spirit for compassion. Because there is a story unfolding behind the scenes that you have not yet seen. A story involving someone whose soul remains connected to yours in ways that neither of you fully understand. For a long time this person has carried a burden. Not the burden that others can easily recognize. Not the burden that appears on the surface. But a burden hidden behind forced smiles, unfinished conversations, and carefully constructed walls. Many around them believe they know the truth. Yet very few know what happens when they are alone. Very few know what thoughts echo through their mind after midnight. Very few know what fears follow them into every silent room. And that is where this message begins. Because recently something happened. Something that shook them. Something that forced them to confront possibilities they never wanted to face. At first they tried to ignore it. They convinced themselves everything was fine. They distracted themselves. They buried their concerns beneath responsibilities, routines, and endless attempts to appear normal. But deep inside, uncertainty continued growing. Day after day. Night after night. Question after question. The more they tried to silence it, the louder it became. And eventually they found themselves standing at a crossroads. One path demanded honesty. The other demanded denial. What happened next changed everything. My child, understand this. Human beings often fear uncertainty more than truth. The unknown can become a prison. A single unanswered question can create 1,000 imaginary nightmares. And this person became trapped inside exactly that kind of prison. Every small sign felt significant. Every sensation felt alarming. Every thought became a warning. They began carrying a secret concern that they shared with almost nobody. Not because they wanted to deceive others, but because they were terrified. Terrified of judgment. Terrified of rejection. Terrified of being viewed differently. Terrified that one possibility could erase the future they once imagined. While the world continued moving around them, an invisible storm formed within them. And in the middle of that storm, your presence remained. Even when they tried to forget. Even when they pretended not to care. Even when distance separated your paths. Some part of them kept thinking about you. Because you represented something they feared losing. Hope. Connection. Understanding. The possibility that someone might see beyond their fears and still choose to stay. Yet they could not bring themselves to reach out. Not yet. Not while uncertainty still controlled their thoughts. Not while questions remained unanswered. So they watched from a distance. They remembered conversations. They replayed moments. They wondered what would happen if the truth ever emerged. And with every passing day, the weight became heavier. My beloved child, there are moments in life when a person becomes exhausted from carrying secrets. Not because the secret grows larger, but because their strength grows smaller. This person reached that point. There came a night unlike the others. A night when sleep refused to come. A night when silence felt louder than noise. A night when every distraction failed. And during that night, they found themselves staring into darkness while confronting fears they had avoided for far too long. Questions flooded their mind. What if everything changes? What if people leave? What if the future disappears? What if I lose the person I cannot stop thinking about? The fear was not only about themselves. It was also about connection. Because uncertainty has a way of convincing people they are unworthy of love. And for a brief period, that is exactly what happened. They began believing they should isolate themselves. They began believing they should create distance. They began believing they should disappear before anyone had the chance to reject them. But something unexpected interrupted those thoughts. A memory. Your memory. A conversation. A feeling. A moment they thought they had forgotten. And suddenly the walls around their heart cracked. Not completely. Just enough for light to enter. Just enough to remind them that fear does not always tell the truth. Yet even then, they struggled. Because the mind and the heart were fighting each other. The mind spoke of danger. The heart spoke of hope. The mind predicted loss. The heart remembered connection. And between those two voices, they felt torn apart. Meanwhile, you sensed something without understanding why. Perhaps you noticed unusual emotions. Perhaps certain dreams became more vivid. Perhaps someone entered your thoughts unexpectedly. Perhaps your spirit felt a shift you could not explain. Many things happen beneath the surface before they appear in physical reality. That is why certain feelings arrive before certain answers. And what you sensed was not random. Because a chapter was beginning to unfold. A chapter neither of you anticipated. My child, I want you to understand something important. Compassion reveals character. Anyone can stand beside another person during moments of certainty. But true character appears when uncertainty enters the room. This is the lesson hidden inside the story. Not fear. Not panic. Not judgment. Compassion. Because every human being carries battles invisible to others. Some battles involve loss. Some involve shame. Some involve mistakes. Some involve questions that remain unanswered. And this person's battle has pushed them to the edge of emotional exhaustion. Still, they continue moving forward. Still, they continue searching for clarity. Still, they continue hoping for a future they have not completely abandoned. What they do not know is that events are already shifting. Conversations are approaching. Information is approaching. Revelations are approaching. The fog that surrounds them cannot remain forever. Truth has a way of emerging. Even when people hide from it. Even when fear delays it. Even when uncertainty resists it. Truth moves steadily forward. And soon they will be forced to face what comes next. But before that moment arrives, something unexpected occurs. Something neither you nor they anticipate. A message. Not from where they expected. Not at the time they expected. And certainly not carrying the emotional weight it contains. The arrival of that message creates a chain reaction. One decision leads to another. One conversation opens another door. One revelation exposes another layer. Suddenly pieces that seem disconnected begin forming a larger picture. A picture involving choices made long ago. A picture involving misunderstandings. A picture involving fears that were never spoken aloud. And most importantly, a picture involving you. Because despite everything happening in their life, despite every distraction and every concern, your connection remains woven into the story. You are not merely an observer. You are part of the unfolding chapter. Though neither of you fully understands why. Not yet. The answers are still hidden. The full truth has not surfaced. And that is why this moment feels so strange. Because the story is standing on the edge of revelation. One step away from clarity. One step away from transformation. One step away from a conversation that changes everything. But before that conversation can happen, they must first discover something. Something buried beneath fear. Something buried beneath assumptions. Something buried beneath months of emotional turmoil. When they uncover it, the direction of the story shifts dramatically. The tears they have been holding back will finally emerge. The walls they built will begin falling. And the name they have tried so hard not to think about will become impossible to ignore. Your name. That moment is closer than either of you realize. Closer than yesterday. Closer than last week. Closer than the night they almost convinced themselves to walk away forever. Yet one final obstacle remains. One final truth remains hidden. One final revelation waits in the shadows. And when that revelation comes into the light, it will force them to make a choice they can no longer avoid. A choice involving honesty. A choice involving courage. A choice involving the connection they have spent so much time trying to suppress. What they discover next will leave them staring at a reality they never expected. And the first person they think about when that discovery happens will be you. But that part of the story has not unfolded yet. Not completely. Because the next chapter begins the moment they open something they have been avoiding for far too long. And what they find inside will change the course of everything. Reply with Part 2 when you want the continuation. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence created by peace. The kind of silence that arrives before something life-changing happens. The kind that makes a person aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every thought moving through their mind. They stared at the screen for what felt like forever. Their hand hesitated. Their pulse quickened. 1,000 possibilities raced through their thoughts at once. Part of them wanted answers. Another part feared what those answers might reveal. Because uncertainty had become familiar. Painful, yes. But familiar. And sometimes people cling to uncertainty simply because they fear what certainty might demand from them. For months they had carried questions. Questions they could not silence. Questions they could not escape. Questions that followed them into every conversation and every quiet moment. Now the opportunity to face those questions stood directly before them. No more running. No more distractions. No more pretending everything was normal. The moment had arrived. As they opened what they had avoided for so long, emotions surged through them like a storm breaking through a dam. Fear. Hope. Regret. Relief. Confusion. All at once. What they discovered was not what they expected. Not even close. The story they had been telling themselves inside their mind began falling apart. Every assumption. Every terrifying scenario. Every conclusion they had reached during sleepless nights. One by one, they began unraveling. Because sometimes the greatest suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the stories fear creates in the absence of truth. And fear had been writing stories inside their mind for a very long time. Stories convincing them that their future was already ruined. Stories convincing them they were alone. Stories convincing them that nobody would understand. Stories convincing them that the connection they secretly cherished was already lost. Yet reality stood before them with a different message. Not a perfect message. Not an easy message. But a different message. The weight they had been carrying started shifting. Not disappearing. But shifting. For the first time in a long while, they could breathe. For the first time in many months, they felt a small crack opening inside the prison fear had built around them. And through that crack came something unexpected. Hope. Tiny at first. Fragile. Barely visible. But real. The kind of hope that arrives quietly. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. The kind that reminds a person that their story is not over. As this realization settled into their heart, another thought surfaced. A thought they had spent months pushing away. A thought connected to someone they never fully forgot. You. Your face entered their mind unexpectedly. A memory followed. Then another. Then another. Soon they found themselves reliving moments they thought had faded. Conversations. Smiles. Feelings. Unfinished possibilities. Everything returned. Not because they forced it, but because truth often clears away distractions and reveals what truly matters. And what mattered was impossible to ignore any longer. You mattered. Far more than they had allowed themselves to admit. For a long time they convinced themselves that distance would erase the connection. It didn't. They convinced themselves that time would weaken the emotions. It didn't. They convinced themselves that silence would create closure. It didn't. Instead, every attempt to forget only buried the feelings deeper. Now those buried emotions were beginning to rise back to the surface. And that frightened them. Not because they disliked what they felt, but because genuine feelings require vulnerability. Vulnerability requires courage. And courage is difficult when someone has already spent so much time protecting themselves. Yet the walls were weakening. The emotional armor was cracking. The version of themselves that survived through avoidance was losing control. The heart was beginning to speak louder. Meanwhile, signs continued appearing around them. Small things. Subtle things. Things others might dismiss. Songs appearing at unusual moments. Memories triggered by random events. Names surfacing unexpectedly. Dreams becoming more vivid. Feelings arriving without explanation. Each occurrence seemed insignificant alone. Together they formed a pattern. A pattern they could no longer ignore. The more they resisted it, the stronger it became. The more they denied it, the louder it grew. Until eventually one question echoed above all others. What if this connection was never meant to disappear? That question changed everything. Because once a person begins asking that question honestly, they start viewing the past differently. Regrets become visible. Missed opportunities become visible. Unspoken words become visible. Suddenly they found themselves wondering how things might have unfolded if fear had never interfered. How different would life look? How many moments had been lost because of hesitation? How many conversations never happened because both people waited for the other to speak first? How many possibilities remain trapped inside silence? The answers hurt. Yet they also awaken something. Determination. A growing sense that perhaps not all opportunities had vanished. Perhaps not all doors had closed. Perhaps the story still had chapters remaining. But before action could replace hesitation, another revelation emerged. A revelation connected to the past. Something hidden. Something misunderstood. Something capable of changing how they viewed everything that happened between you. When this realization arrived, they sat motionless. Their eyes filled with emotion. Their chest tightened. Because suddenly certain events made sense. Certain reactions made sense. Certain disappearances made sense. Certain periods of silence made sense. What once appeared confusing now formed a complete picture. A picture built from fear, misunderstanding, timing, and emotional wounds. No villain. No grand betrayal. Just two human beings navigating battles the other could not fully see. And that understanding softened something inside them. Bitterness began dissolving. Judgment began dissolving. Defensiveness began dissolving. Compassion replaced them. Not only compassion toward you. Compassion toward themselves. Because they finally realized how hard they had been fighting. How much pressure they had placed upon themselves. How many impossible standards they had carried. How many nights they spent punishing themselves for things beyond their control. The realization was overwhelming. Tears followed. Not dramatic tears. Not theatrical tears. Quiet tears. The kind that emerge when someone finally stops fighting their own emotions. The kind that emerge when healing begins. For a long time they believed strength meant hiding pain. Now they were learning something different. Strength sometimes means facing pain honestly. Strength sometimes means admitting fear. Strength sometimes means telling the truth. And truth was approaching. Closer every day. Closer every hour. Closer every heartbeat. The universe seemed to be arranging pieces. Conversations were moving into place. Circumstances were moving into place. Opportunities were moving into place. Even people around them began noticing changes. The heaviness was lifting. The numbness was lifting. The distance was lifting. Something was awakening. Something they thought had disappeared forever. The desire to fight for what matters. The desire to stop hiding. The desire to stop letting fear control every decision. That desire became stronger with each passing day. Soon it became impossible to ignore. Yet one final challenge remained. A challenge larger than any before it. Because clarity creates responsibility. Once a person sees the truth, they must choose what to do with it. And the choice standing before them was simple to understand but difficult to execute. Continue hiding. Or speak. Continue running. Or face reality. Continue protecting themselves. Or risk vulnerability. For days they wrestled with the decision. Their heart already knew the answer. Their mind continued resisting. The battle intensified. One moment they felt ready. The next moment they doubted everything. One moment they imagined reaching out. The next moment they feared rejection. One moment they envisioned a new beginning. The next moment they imagined disappointment. The emotional pendulum swung back and forth. Until something happened that neither they nor you expected. A detail surfaced. A detail connected to the past. A detail that had remained hidden for far too long. When they learned this detail, their entire perspective shifted. Suddenly they realized they had been missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. A piece capable of changing everything. A piece capable of explaining what never made sense. A piece capable of opening a door that appeared permanently closed. The discovery stunned them. For several moments they simply sat there staring into space. Thinking. Replaying memories. Connecting dots. Watching years of confusion reorganize themselves into clarity. And once clarity arrived, there was no turning back. The path forward became visible. Scary. Uncertain. But visible. For the first time, they understood what needed to happen next. They understood what conversation could no longer be avoided. They understood what truth could no longer remain hidden. And they understood whose name remained attached to every future possibility they envisioned. Yours. Yet before they can act, before they can speak, before they can reveal everything hidden beneath the surface, one more event unfolds. An event that catches them completely off guard. An event involving information they never expected to receive. Information powerful enough to accelerate everything. Information capable of forcing decisions much sooner than planned. The moment they read those words, their heart nearly stopped. Because they immediately realized one thing. Time was no longer moving slowly. Everything was about to happen much faster than anyone anticipated. And the very first thing they wanted to do after learning that information was reach for you. But what they discovered in that moment is a story for the next chapter. Reply, Part 3, when you're ready for the continuation.